everybody, welcome back to the Teach Back method, where I teach you guys something I'm learning about in grad school to help me understand it better. On today's video, we're going to be talking about different types of practice in neuromuscular reeducation. Let's get into it. So these are all the different types of practice that we're going to be reviewing today. I know it looks a little overwhelming, but some of these we're going to pair up together because they're going to act as opposites from each other. So I'm going to go through and show you those. So mass practice and distributed practice, we're going to pair those together. Part and whole, we're going to pair these. Blocked and random, we're going to pair. And then constant and variable, we're going to pair. Let's go ahead and break them down. The first pairing that we're going to discuss is mass practice and distributed practice. When you look at the beginning of the word, you're going to kind of determine where we're headed here. So when we think of mass, I like to think of a lot, bunched all together. And when distributed, you're going to think our items are spaced out. So that's exactly what we're talking about. So with our mass practice, our repetitions in practice are bunched together with minimal to no rest breaks in between. So our repetitions with minimal breaks. Our distributed practice is just the opposite. So we're having our practice with breaks in between. Now, there is research to suggest that distributed practice is more beneficial to our learner than mass practice. And that's because with distributed practice, we have these breaks in between. So, our patient or the learner is having the break in between to aid in the fatigue. So they're not going to fatigue as quickly as they would with this mass practice with minimal to no breaks. And additionally, when we're talking about breaks in between, that can include overnights. So maybe they're having some sleep in between, which is going to aid in the memory of that task. So when we're comparing the two, most often than not, we like to think distributed is better than our mass practice because of those breaks. The next practice pairings that I'm going to pair up are part practice and whole practice. And these are pretty self-explanatory too when you think of the words. So part practice is when we're separating different parts of a task that can be broken up easily. So we're separating our segments of a task. And whole practice is just the opposite. We're not separating the segment, it's a continuous motion. Now, some examples. So when I think of part practice, I think of maybe learning to play a new piece on your instrument or perhaps a gymnastics or dance routine because we're able to separate different segments rather than bunching them all together. If we bunch it all together, it can be very overwhelming and more difficult to learn. With whole practice, it's better if we keep things together that are continuous items. So thinking of walking or jogging. It's more difficult for a learner to understand if we really try to break it down of rather continuous process. So that's the difference between the two. The next type of practice is called mental practice. This too is pretty self-explanatory when you think about it. Mental practice is just going over the skill or task in your head prior to doing it. So we're kind of imagining, picturing the scene in our head. Now, of course, the opposite of mental practice would be physical practice. Physical practice would be performing the task. Now, mental practice is not as beneficial as physical practice. So we would prefer physical practice over mental practice. But we also prefer mental practice versus no practice at all. The next type of practice is called guided practice. And this is when our therapist is hands-on with the patient, manual assistance to perform the task. Now this is helpful for the performance of the task, but not learning the task. So let's put it into words. Guided practice. When our therapist has manual assistance on the learner to perform the task. Guided practice. The next set of grouping we're going to talk about is block practice and repeated practice. This too can be self-explanatory when you think about it. So block practice is when we're performing one task over and over again. We're not putting a different task in between them, and we're not having too much time in between performing that same task. So block practice is when we're repeating the same task over and over. The opposite of block practice is random practice, and this is when we're performing different tasks in a different order. So we're not doing one task all together in a row. We're performing task A, task B, task D, task A, and so on, a completely random order. So different tasks perhaps out of sequence, or just a random order. Now, our literature tends to point that random practice is better than blocked practice. The last types of practice we're going to talk about is constant practice versus variable practice. Now, for these types, we're going to be performing the same skill in each. So, when we're performing the same skill, and the difference is our parameters. So same skill, same parameters. Same skill, different parameters. Now, this is not to be confused with blocked and random practice, because in blocked and random practice, we have different skills, same parameters. Here, we have our same skills, different parameters. I hope you guys learned something in this video. Come back to my page to learn more.